Welcome to Modern Anarchy, the podcast featuring real conversations with conscious objectors to the status quo. I'm your host, Nicole.
I tried to keep her quiet, but she's screaming inside of me. I tried to keep her hiding, oh, shut up. I tried to keep her quiet, but she's a wild, wild woman.
Hello, Modern Anarchist community. On today's episode, we are joined by the polyamorous and kinky non-binary trans therapist, Clark Hazel, who shares their vulnerable story of resilience. Together, we talk about never getting the lesbian sex talk, the paradoxical logic of the patriarchy, and processing through shame. Clark, this is a story of strength and resilience. I am in awe of the ways that you have stood tall in your truth and in your authentic expression against multiple barriers and levels of oppression. Your strength truly is remarkable. I hope you see that. And thank you for all of the vulnerability that you brought into this space about the shame that still comes up for you. I am so glad that you normalize that in this conversation, that it doesn't just end when we get out and into a safer place. There's still so much work that we do internally to process these things. And I appreciate your vulnerability of where you're at. And yeah, just want to sing songs of praise of your strength. And you are a light. You're an example to so many other people that have gone through various forms of spiritual abuse. And so thank you. Truly, thank you. And to all of the listeners out there is a lot of discussion about spiritual abuse and LGBTQIA oppression. So please take care of yourself and do what you need to do with your boundaries about tuning in and seeking the support that you need. Yeah, this episode really hit home for me, and I'm sure it will for a lot of you. Y'all, tune in. So do you have any questions about the podcast? Anything for me before we get into it?
Yeah, I was listening to a few folks, and then also Jason's recording. Also, one of them was so interesting. The person that was sharing their experience about being raised in Mormonism.
Ooh,
and
Raina.
Yes, I have a lot of similarities with Raina.
I want to hear.
It was a little too surreal.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
So were you raised Mormon?
Yes, I was.
Oh.
Yes. Raised Mormon, raised as a Mormon girl, which is no fun. A lot of policing, a lot of shaming, especially around sex, masturbation, how we dress, a lot of control.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, it's a bit much. Definitely has lasting impacts. I've been out of the church for several years now, but I still notice it coming up for me, even in my work with clients and just how I move about the world. So I'm actively working on learning that internalized shame.
Yeah. Is that something that you might feel comfortable talking about here? Something that you would be willing to talk about in this space?
Oh, totally.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, because there's a lot there, and I know it might be a sensitive topic too as well, because it's, I can resonate with you in that sense of like it still comes up in pieces, even when you feel like you've processed so much of it, and then it still creeps in. You're like, God, where the hell is that coming from?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It sticks with us. I mean, if you think about it, for how many years you're in a religion, and then you're out of that, you still have 20-something years that you have been impacted by, and you're not going to swift through it in 2 to 3 years. It's going to take some time, and it'll probably be long lasting and continuous process. Yeah, I was raised in a little farm town in California in a very small Mormon community, and a lot of pressure to attend church as a young person. My grandma and aunt actually started one of the Mormon churches in Winters. So they broke ground and did a lot of fundraising, and so it's pretty important to my family, family history, and also attending church. I also wasn't raised in the typical Mormon family as well. My mom was the breadwinner. My dad made less money, had less education than my mom, and so my mom wore the pants in the family, which was not okay in the Mormon church.
Yeah.
So feeling a lot of shame as a kid and being shamed for not having like the typical mom that was going with me to like different Mormon girl functions that we would have, or sitting with us at church. I felt a lot of stigma. I felt out of place and not necessarily accepted. It was very challenging. I was also like the good girl in my family. My sibling ended up leaving the church about 15 or 16 when I was about 12, and so I was the only kid that was actively going to church with my dad, and my grandma would attend church with us, so I would sit with my grandma, but so I was kind of like, well, no one else is going, my mom's not going, my sibling isn't going, so you're kind of like voted in to that space, and like all the expectations were then like placed on me to carry it on.
Yes, to be that good girl, as you said. Could you say more? And you feel like, what do you feel like was expected of you at that time?
To be obedient, basically, to follow all the rules, to attend all the functions. I had to be an active participant in leadership positions, going to Bible study during high school, temple trips, going to girls' camp. I even had positions where I was youth girls camp president for all the girls, and so I was actually part of like a year-long planning for the week of girls camp. So I just had a lot of expectations, and yeah, it was very overwhelming at times, and a lot of coercion and like physical intimidation to go to church from family members, a lot of manipulation from like my mom for me to go to church, and I didn't really feel like I had a choice in the matter. And so yeah, I don't think I fully believed in the church, but I was so brainwashed and pressured into going that I was like, I'm just going to do the thing and try to make it through.
Right. So it sounds like at the time you were in it, but it didn't seem like it fully resonated with you. You were feeling that sort of pressure that this is what your family system wants of you. And I guess wants isn't even the right word, is forcing out of you, right? But to you, it didn't seem like it resonated fully, even at that young age.
No. And I inadvertently, as a baby Clark, I was very sick as an infant. I had several emergency surgeries, and I was in the ICU for several weeks, and my parents were not sure if I was going to make it. And I was in such critical condition that, you know, my family were constantly by my side because they weren't sure if I was going to live, and doing different, you know, blood drives, and someone with me like around the clock. And it actually brought my dad back to church, which cursed baby self that my, you know, near-death experience brought my dad closer to the religion and my parents back closer into the faith. My mom is a convert to the Mormon church, and my dad was born and raised. He would attend church just because it was expected of him. And then when I came along, I was very ill. Then he kind of recommitted to God if I were to live, that he would go back to church and be involved and yada, yada, yada. And then good thing, bad thing that I made it, you know. But my dad went back to church, and then he was really hardcore about it, and then very hard on us to attend with him.
Right, yeah. And then how hard is it to sit with that knowing that my birth is what caused them to go back to the thing that is forcing this whole rigid structure on me that I don't align with.
Yeah, it's very odd to have something so traumatic recounted that you don't remember, and also you being like the reason that brings people in closer to a religion that you're like, ugh, I hate that. Hate that for me. Hate that for my family.
Yeah, exactly.
Darn those intestines, you know. Yeah, born in the church, I got baptized at 8. I even remember my baptism day where, you know, my mom knelt down next to me, eye to eye, was letting me know that it was my choice to join the Mormon church, and that, you know, mom and dad are part of the church and it's really important to our family, but it was really my choice. And I remember thinking, like, is it? Because, like, you took me to get my baptism pictures and, like, you're really invested in this party afterwards. Yeah. How does one at 8 actually have a voice and choice in joining this? I was so afraid of getting baptized because I'm like, well, I can't make any mistakes after this. Like, I am washed clean. And I remember just like having so many panic attacks as a little one because I'm like, I was just dreading that baptism because I'm like, I'm going to hell. Like, all these things are going to start accumulating on my God's just gonna be there like sitting tallying up all my sins. I'm like, I can't get baptized again. I'd have to yeet myself out of the church and then get rebaptized to be able to like wipe those sins clean. I just remember freaking out every time I would do something. I would feel so much anxiety of like, oh, that's another one. There goes another one.
Wow. At 8 years old, right? 8 years old, you're grappling with the reality of, am I going to be sent to hell for these decisions I'm making at 8?
Oh, yeah.
I feel like this is something that's not talked about enough, right? How many kids, I think they just kind of like, oh, kids get it. It's a story. Like, they get it, right? But I don't think parents understand the amount of psychological pressure that we're placing on children when we tell them these stories and what it can actually do to us at that time. Because I felt very similar in that same way with that sort of pressure where every single thought you're like, is this sin? Is this wrong? Is this going to be the thing that sends me to hell? Am I truly saved? And that sort of stress cycle is just...
Absolutely.
Ooh, I think there needs to be more space about these sorts of things.
And also the signaling, like in the home, you know, having pictures of us, you know, my parents got married in the temple and they got sealed to us, which is like a very special blessing. You know, your kids get sealed for you for time and all eternity, right?
Right.
And so if I didn't make that decision of getting baptized, I wouldn't be with my family for eternity. Like, what kid is like, you know what, I'm going to fuck this up and I'm just not going to get baptized and like see you whenever. That's not
At
real.
8. Yeah,
exactly.
No, it's not going to happen.
I'm not going to break my family apart for eternity. Like, who's going to do that? No.
Exactly. And so then where's the autonomy in that choice?
Precisely. So I got baptized, went forward into young women's, so at age 12, and then, gosh, there's so much church. Church was like all week, every day. I felt like I was constantly, just so many eyes on me all the time. And we lived in a very small town, and like if my sister was like very much a rebel, out as queer, and not attending church, and we would get phone calls all the time from fellow Mormons of like, do you know that your daughter is doing this with this person at this location? And it was actually my job as a kid to like run home before my parents got home and delete all the voicemails that like church members were leaving about my sibling, so that there wouldn't be contention or, you know, physical fights in my home. And it was very intense to be that like, you know, peacekeeper in the home. So I felt so scared to make any kind of ripple in my family life that I just assimilated. And it's been really hard to also unlearn that because, you know, having the being empowered to consent to things, right? I feel like that was like stomped out of me. Absolutely, like so hard. I'm constantly trying to check in with myself to ask, like, what do I actually want to say in this moment? Is it a yes? What is my yes?
Yeah.
I never felt empowered to make these decisions. We were literally so brainwashed. You know, every meeting we would have these different like sayings and chants and kind of recommitting to just obeying. Yes. Obeying our husbands, obeying the patriarchy, obeying my father, not being empowered to have the priesthood. I actually in college started wearing pants to church and I got actively heckled. My dad told me that I was going to hell, that I was such a disgrace to God, that I should be ashamed of myself, that I wasn't a man and I didn't deserve, you know, God's love in those moments of wearing pants. Like, it was just so much oppression and discrimination for women in the church and trans people, non-binary folks. It's just astounding how harmful religions can be, especially when it's weaponized against folks. Patriarchy sucks.
Yeah. Yes, amen to that, 100%.
That is what I'll say.
Yes, and I think this is where it gets hard, right? Like this respect for people's religions, and also, and yeah, exactly, I fall into the same camp too, where I'm like, I don't want to talk poorly about people's religions, but there is also this really big acknowledgement that there are patriarchal structures present in some of these religions that are inherently harmful, and I think that's where we need to talk and focus our discourse, right? It's not necessarily like attacking the whole church, but recognizing that there's problematic views within it that need to be reformed, and there's space to have these conversations. And so, yeah, it breaks my heart that at 8, you're going through the world trying to figure out how to make decisions and understand, what your yes is, right? And you're in a structure that's telling you you don't actually have a choice at all. And if you don't listen to what we do, the whole community is watching you and going to come down and tell your parents and strike on you more. So, yeah, where is the ability to learn the natural development of what it means to be a child, of making decisions?
Absolutely. like I said, I would go to different church functions. I was heavily involved. I would go to do baptisms for the dead at the temple.
Yeah, sure.
Family history was super important. And my dad had a temple recommend. And so I would go through, interviews with my bishop to be deemed worthy to go in. And of course, that super problematic, disgusting, almost on the verge of like solicitation of a minor, in my view.
Really?
It's just a completely inappropriate setup, having an adult man with a young child asking about masturbation habits. In what ways do you touch yourself? Do you have unclean thoughts? What is the limit? Do you do you allow other people to touch you? And when is that okay? Like, in any context, to ask a small child about masturbation or any kind of inquiry just around body. It's
not. No, absolutely not. It is not appropriate at all to be asking those questions, especially we have to acknowledge the power dynamics here too. This is not just a normal conversation. This is with someone who has a power and authority within the church. And so it's not even like you can freely consent to disclose that information if you wanted to. Right. That is not the dynamic here. We have the implications exactly of what you talked about earlier, that if you don't comply with this system, you're not going to be with your family for all of eternity and you're going to fuck that up.
Well, and also, if I came clean and said, yes, of course I masturbate, like, what child does not touch themselves? Like, hello, developmental age, that's totally normal. And that was complete, like, you don't touch yourself, so of course I'm not going to rat myself out. And if I did, I wouldn't be able to go on these youth trips. So here's the only kid not going with the whole group to the temple. I wonder why. Probably because you're a little slutty slut. You're a little slut. And that's exactly how kids would talk. They're like, this person's not doing well. I think that they're unclean or they're like a skank because they're not going with us. And like my sibling was, labeled all of these horrific things. I would even be passing going to the bathroom and people would be talking about my sibling in it's just horrible ways. So many judgments, having, slut shaming, sex shaming. It was just terrible to hear that. And so I'm like, of course, I'm not going to out myself. Even, in sacrament, I would look over to, my family member who was struggling with maintaining being in the church and would actively have to skip over the sacrament. So here's everybody with nothing else to do but watch each other partake in the sacrament, recommitting each week to those commitments in the temple and to God and to basically being obedient. And if you actually see someone pass the sacrament and not take it, something is up. Mm-hmm. They're doing something wrong. It could be sexual reasons. It could be that they're losing faith in the church. And so you're actively outing. And also that coercion from, the bishop of saying, if you want to be right with the Lord and you want to be entered back into the fold, you have to go through counseling with me. And these are the ways that you have to repent. And that is also bringing unwanted attention and shame to you. Yes.
100% that you shouldn't have to deal with at any point in your life, let alone early childhood.
Precisely. So of course I lied my pants off to be able to go into the temple with all my buddies and not be outed. Yeah, and of course when I would go into the temple, I would be full of nerves. Yeah. I'd be shaking. I'd be so afraid. And I would actually feel so bad for the people that wouldn't be entered into the kingdom of God because I knew that I was dirty for masturbating and that these souls were not getting that acceptance into the church. That's what I would be sitting with.
The dead souls that you were being baptized for.
Yes. And my dad would be like, you need to, do the temple work and you need to get baptized for these family members. And I would actively say no because I knew in my heart, I'm like, I've been touching myself. I'm not even supposed to be in this space. And now my family members, my ancestors cannot get brought into the church because I lied and I felt horrible.
Wow.
And I mean, we all knew that we masturbated, that we were doing these unclean things in the eyes of the church, but of course we're not going to say anything because, like we said, it's a small town. Mm-hmm. Shame. I saw it from my sister and other family members, and it's like, is that really worth it?
No, it's not safe.
Do I want to have that conversation with my parents of like, why aren't you going to the temple with everybody? Of course not.
No.
Absolutely ridiculous, the pressure that the Mormon church and family members put on their kids.
Mm-hmm.
And how much it screws up our understanding as like girls, as like other folks, genders in general, like being able to say no. Like we're in that process of like, is no. Or saying this is not okay. It's okay for these older white men to ask me such intrusive questions, but strangers can't. Like, where's that line? You know?
It's
so
not
contradictive.
Okay. It's not okay.
Just setting folks up for failure. Yeah. And also for, young kids not to be able to say no in very dangerous situations.
Mm-hmm.
So ridiculous. So I definitely attended church. I even, went through kind of like, Eagle Scout route, but for girls. I was in leadership positions throughout high school, attended all of the baptisms for the dead. I also got different like blessings. So if you're 16 or you're going to go on your mission, you usually get another blessing that kind of is foreseeing your future in the church. And you're not supposed to share it with people. And it was very heavy on like, I'm going to marry a man and I'm going to have, kids and bring children. And that's my duty as a woman, is to bring forth a bunch of kiddos. And it was like said that I would have multiple kids. And I kind of scoffed at that at the time. And I was like, that's not happening. Yeah, no, it's pretty ridiculous.
Wow. And I think people who aren't in the Mormon church might not understand like that blessing. It's like, it's foreseeing your future to a degree, right? It's telling you what the prophets, the leaders in your community have heard from God about your future. So it's not just a soft little blessing. It is this is where you're going. And if you don't, that means you've fallen off the path of God.
Exactly. Yeah. Patriarchal Blessing. Awful name, obviously.
They actually call it that?
Yeah.
Wow. It's like, does anyone understand?
Anybody saying this? Hello. All alone, great.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
wow.
It was like, it'll be contingent on your obedience and, staying within the church. And, also it definitely highlighted like being obedient to my husband, being obedient to the leaders, and it was just absolutely, like, I look at it occasionally when I'm like, you know what, today was a good day. What if I just spiced it up and just added some trauma? Like, what if I just looked at this little bit of trauma in my life? Let's just shake things up, Things are a little too balanced, and then I'll look at my patriarchal blessing and I'll go off the handles. Just for fun,
Yes,
just a little bit of trauma here and there.
Yes. Hey, it provides contrast sometimes, dude.
My life is so good. I could have been a homemaker. I could have had a ton of little kids running around me. Could have been closeted gay with, probably also a gay husband, and we're just like living this life,
I thank God every day that you don't.
Yeah. Yeah, I still continued after high school into the church. We ended up moving from like the little farm town to a bigger city. I started going to community college. I also attended the Institute of Religion. So I was actively working on going to BYU, Idaho. It's going to be, I had a lot of family in Idaho, a lot of potato farmers. And I'm like, I got family. I guess I'll go to BYU. I started taking institute classes, getting prepped for a mission.
Of course.
Yep. I decided to take foreign language. I started taking ASL classes. Then I got into an interpreting program, and we were required to go to deaf events. And I had been attending the singles ward, and I don't know if you know what a singles ward is.
I do.
It's horrific.
But you should explain, yeah.
What a setup. It is definitely focused on you finding a man, getting married as quick as you can. So if you didn't go, the BYU route straight away, don't worry, because you have a second chance to get married. If that route wasn't your first go, then here's a second option.
Mm-hmm.
So I attended singles ward, and they would have date nights. They would have like service projects and single adult dances. Very centered on getting cozy and getting hitched. There are actually parody movies about Mormons, and if you ever have the want or you're extremely bored out of your mind, watch The Singles Ward.
Okay.
It is very on point. They joke about it, but it's a little too real, and it very much goes into the details, and it's just quite funny. It's quite funny. So Singles Ward was part of my life for 2 years. I started to realize, I'm like, I think I'm gay. I am gay.
Ooh.
I had a high school teacher literally give me It Gets Better, the book. And I'm like, is this for someone? And she's like, no, that's for you. And I'm like, what is the context around this gift?
Yeah,
I don't get it.
Please.
She's like, oh, it just might be helpful in your journey. And I was like, I don't really understand.
Thanks.
Here I am with a bun and like 2 sports bras, very sporty gay, wearing my, you know, jerseys to school. Gay? Who's gay here? Lady. Hashtag offended. Yeah. That planted a seed. I actually had another professor when I was still going to Singles Ward, going to Institute Religion, and it was so funny, the note that she gave me. She handed off this list of like resources, like LGBT centers in the area, different like queer clubs on campus, and was like, oh, part of my, you know, job as a professor is to provide like resources for students. Just like passed it off. I'm like, what?
So were you out?
No, I didn't know I was gay. I'm still in the storming. You know, I'm still trying to figure things out. My mom had always questioned, you know, my sexual orientation. I had put it offside, never, you know, took an interest in dating, especially into college. I just knew I was sporty. I didn't super have affinity for men. Go figure, just in general. But then it started sinking in, like, something might be a little different about me, and people are giving all these clues. And, you know, my sibling would always be like, you're such a lesbian. And I'd be like, oh, hateful. Why would you say such a thing?
Yeah. Not a sin.
Yeah. So rude. So off point. And then I actually went to the LGBT center, met some really great friends. I still have friends. It's been like over 10 years since I attended my first like queer young adult hangout. And then I also went on study abroad and started going to gay clubs in London when I went for about a month. And I was like, okay, I'm definitely gay. I'm absolutely gay. And so I came home. My parents were still putting pressure on me to attend the Singles Ward and to date men. And my dad would just be so over the top, so extra, and be like, we'd be in the car together. And he's like, isn't that guy cute, right? Oh. Cute. And I'm like, Dad, are you trying to tell me that you're gay? Like, you're finding this attractive? Yes. And he's like, you need to start dating. He was basically like, your clock is ticking, and you didn't go to BYU yet. You still are in this space. Like, let's get it poppin'. And so finally, I was in the car, and we're on our way home, and he was just doing the absolute most. And I was like, Dad, I'm gay. I don't find men attractive. And I'm stuck in this car with this man. And I wish I had a queer elder to be like, coming out 101, don't be stuck in a moving mode of transportation when coming out. Because my dad absolutely lost it. Screaming at me, you're not gay. God. You're going to mess up your life. You know, it's going to be such a sad and pathetic life. You're going to be, you know, basically like, you know, depressed. And he used like one of our family friends as an example of like, isn't her life so sad? She's a lesbian, you know, she doesn't have any friends, and she's not a part of her, you know, own family. She doesn't have a family, and very much emphasizing like the hetero, you know, relationship and family structure of like, she doesn't have a man to provide. Like, she's very much on her own. And, you know, I am very close to this person. You know, she would take me on these like camping trips. Very gay, cool. Looking back. Yeah. Like, she's probably in my her kind of Subaru. Yeah. Driving me out with another lesbian and like her gay, you know, nephew, and we would just go gay camping. Gay.
Amazing.
Still was like, oh, I'm not gay, even with that. But, you know, just using these key gay folks, and I have gay cousins, and my dad just highlighting how sad their lives are, and just like, I would be a miserable human, taking that path, you know, of the gays choosing to be gay. It was so uncomfortable. He like even kept the doors locked as we were like in the parking. Yeah, we parked, and was still actively screaming, and I was like, I just need to get out of here. You know, nothing I said was de-escalating, and I was just like, I gotta go.
Wow.
Yeah. Similarly, I was reading some, you know, other resources that I had come across, and my mom came in my room and saw that I was, you know, I don't know if it was the actually It Gets Better book, but my mom, you know, started screaming at me like, do you have something you need to tell me? You know, what are you reading this for? Just very aggro about it. And, you know, I was like, oh no, it was just like given to me by a friend, and trying to, you know, brush it off, and just like storming out of my room. So, you know, conversations were had. Also, you know, I was like confronted by my parents of like, you know, after coming out, I think it was several months later, my parents took me to a Chili's. You know, very classy, déclassé, sat me down, and they're like, so you're a lesbian, and we think it's because of past trauma. And I lost my shit, right?
Oh my God. Mm-hmm. How old were you when that conversation at Chili's happened?
I was 19. You know, I wasn't a young kid. I was, you know.
Still a kid. Still a young adult.
Yep. Very upset. And then I, even in that moment, was like, so you think So I'm a lesbian, and you think spending 18 months with a woman companion, just us two, is your answer to solving me being gay and like getting into the church and like, you know, getting back into the norm and like assimilating. So you think me being in a studio apartment with another woman for 18 months is going to fix me being a lesbian? Like, do you see how that worked out in your mind? Did you think that through? Like, I literally started like laughing at my parents for this idea as if that's gonna cure my gayness.
That was their plan. Like, okay, we're gonna fix your aunt, right? Like, let's put you with your aunt for a year. Okay.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Another woman for 18 months alone, and that's my only companion. I can't reach out. It was quite funny.
I mean, they're helping you be gay at this point. So,
exactly. I was like, yes, I would love a gay vacation for 18 months where I could forget about my problems. Feel safe. Yep. Yeah, little oasis. Yep. Come on, parents. And I actually left and started walking home, and they had to drive and like follow me, and then I got back in the car, and then they took me home. But that was absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, what were you feeling at that time?
A lot of shame. A lot of shame. So much anger. The fact that they would, you know, use this old trope that, you know, just because you've experienced trauma, that of course that's going to make you gay. I mean, so much pressure on me to educate my parents about queerness. So much for me to hold, you know, all these, you know, having good intentions versus impact. The impact was catastrophic. Like, I still feel hurt and, you know, have that in me, just like in my body now. You know, it's just a part of me. It's like, wow, you know, if I ever were to share this with a, you know, a cis person that I've been, you know, abused as a child, like, okay, they're going to be like, aha, that's why you're gay.
Oh, which is so invalidating of your authentic attraction.
Exactly.
It's horrible. Yes.
So I came out, not great experience. Continued to go to queer groups, you know, further developing my vocabulary around gender identity and expression and queerness, and just seeing other queer folks and how they're living. And I'm still attending church, and then I started needing to get more experience acquiring ASL, and so I switched. I went from singles ward, and this was like taken really hard by my dad that I switched from going to singles ward, which, you know, obviously his plan is for me to get married off ASAP.
Getting in the way of that.
Yeah, definitely did. He was not happy about it. I actually had to lie and sneak and go to a different church, and so I tried to hide that for a long time. But when I brought it down, I'm like, oh, it's still in the pursuit of going to BYU. I need these credits for getting transferred over. So then I started warming up to it. So Mormon churches are fascinating. So they'll have different meetings for different like cultures, for different identities. And I went to it's called like a deaf branch. So there's different branches within wards and stakes. It's very interesting, their structures. But anywho, so it was primarily deaf folks. I was interpreting Sunday church lessons and interpreting, you know, the main sacrament meeting is what it's called. And I started to feel more comfortable and confident and accepted and loved. And I think that was probably like one of the first times that my, you know, queerness was actually discussed. It was named. And that was really like radical for me. Yeah, I had just felt so excluded and just conditioned and oppressed and pushed into church. And I actually was excited to go to church because I felt acceptance and for who I was, and I felt valued and cared for. It was really different experience, and I really loved going to church. Also, you know, on the flip side, I started to realize like how oppressive the church was towards deaf folks, accessibility. You know, a lot of hearing members would talk about, you know, it's so distracting. It was just so frustrating. And, you know, as a hearing person, I have hearing privilege and able to be in those spaces and advocate and also interpret, you know, conversations. It was just a lot of clashing, a lot of oppression and, you know, pushing deaf culture aside. And they ended up, you know, merging the two wards. So hearing services and deaf folks would be intermingling, which was just absolutely chaotic. A lot of deaf folks felt oppressed, understandably, and accurate. And just having to deal with, you know, not supportive members. So I would actively be, you know, discriminated against or like, you know, called out for my short hair. And in the space, I felt comfortable starting to wear bow ties. Like I had a deaf member buy me a bow tie for the very first time, and I was like on cloud nine. That was probably one of the most exciting accessories to this day that I think I've ever gotten as a gift. and I had to hide it. I couldn't leave my house wearing it. I had to wait and then actually like change in my car before walking into like church services. Because like I said, my dad would start screaming at me for, you know, wearing pants. And I got to that point where, you know, other members, deaf members were like, you should wear pants. What if you wore like the equivalent of like the priesthood holders? And I was like, you're right. Like, what's the worst that could happen? So I bought a white button down shirt. I wore my bow tie and my black slacks. And I was even, you know, treated as like a priesthood member basically by the deaf community, and I was interpreting the priesthood blessing over the sacrament, and the hearing congregants lost their shit about it. Absolutely lost it. I guess there were meetings about it as well, which I wasn't included in. With like some deaf priesthood holders were like, why can't Clark, you know, bless the sacrament? We need it interpreted. They're doing great. And they're like, this person's a woman. Women cannot, you know, give blessings. They can't sit, you know, in like the priesthood, you know, holder area, which, you know, the men will line up and then they grab the bread and water. And I wasn't allowed in that space. And it was just like, brought me back into my shell again. I was coming out. I was feeling confident in my decisions and my gender expression, and finally feeling this, you know, love basically. And I don't think I've ever felt loved in the church. I felt love was very much dependent on my obedience. Was I doing all the things? And here they were encouraging me to express myself and just accept me and love me for who I was. And I don't even think I've ever felt that from Jesus. You know, I've never felt that from God. And I felt that through community, the deaf community. And that literally has changed my life. Yeah. And to be step back into the closet basically and oppressed, and you know, here comes the patriarchy again.
Yeah. Bastards. Wow. You just start to get that first breath of fresh air when you start to come out and feel that love, and it just gets hammered out of you hard.
Absolutely. It was really devastating. And then, you know, I started feeling more confident leaving my house in my bow tie and my shirt, and then just being heckled by my dad every Sunday. And told I was a disgrace. And, you know, am I happy with my decisions? Am I happy with, you know, disgracing God? And I mean, it would be about other things as well, like drinking coffee. He told my mom and I that I was going to hell for drinking coffee. You know, if I would leave on Sunday, he would literally chase me out of the house, trying to get me back into my house. Wow. He was very intense about being obedient and going to church and doing all the things. So it was very scary leaving my house on Sundays. And I also met a lesbian at church, a hearing person, and she actually started backtracking. So she was living with her partner for many years, and her father, last wishes, was like, I want you to go back to church. I want you to be right with the Lord. I want you to marry a man. You have to stop living your authentic life. And she did. And it was really disturbing to hear her story. You know, she was actively pursuing men, and she was still living with her partner, but, you know, started sleeping in a separate room. And then she basically, you know, went back in the closet and started going to singles wards. And like, this was applauded by other members. It was even announced, you know, that folks were dating. And so having that pressure. And I remember recounting this to one of my mentors, and they're like, you gotta leave. You cannot be talking to this person. You can't be around her. Like, this is so harmful.
I'm hearing so much that you didn't feel safe. And even within the church and within your family structure, your father, the way that he would use such force to keep you within this structure is heartbreaking to me.
It was very upsetting. Yeah, it was really frightening to hear this woman recount her experience and just seeing my future of like, if I go to BYU, if I'm doing these things,
God, yeah,
I can't keep going down this path. And it's really been helpful to have mentors pop up in my life and, you know, guide me, because I think, you know, without that outward, you know, voice and other queer folks telling me like, you have a different path. This is not the path. Like, you actually have a choice, and actually believing that and like embodying that feeling of like, I have a choice. And, you know, I would start pushing back. My mom would be like, you know, if you're going to live with us, these are the agreements. You go to church, You go to the singles ward. And I'm like, when did we have this contract? Like, I'm an adult. This is no longer what I want to do.
Right.
And it was very much, pushed back on by a lot of my family. And it was just unbearable. It became like a point of being unbearable. And so I started to decide, like, what do I need to do to get out? And I know my cousin was trying to get out of the church, and she's like, it's impossible to leave. It's absolutely impossible to leave. You have to find a lawyer at some point because you have to contest it. You have to write your bishop, and it has to go up to the chain of command, literally to like the prophet, right? So to be able to leave and get your name taken off the rolls, because they can still count you. And your records will travel, like, whenever we have moved any address, even when I moved from my my hometown to Sacramento, the missionaries would find us, and my records would get transferred to the stake that we're at. And it was so fucking creepy to just be walking around, and here comes the missionaries. Are you such and such? I'm like, do you have a tracker on my phone? Like, is there a satellite following me? Like, how the hell did you find me?
Yes.
It's so creepy.
Yes, that's exactly what Raina talked about, how they were following her too. And so, yeah, it's like, how do we not consider this a form of stalking? Like, you've left the church and they are finding you in places.
It is absolutely frightening. I'm like, I don't want that. I don't want to be reengaged. I don't want them to continue to count me as a member of the church.
Yeah, no.
Like, fuck that. So I started formally a plan. I'm like, what do I need to do? I'm not being authentic. The church is becoming more and more oppressive. I'm getting badgered by members. I'm getting called out. My family is actively, it feels dangerous. That's what I can name. It felt very dangerous, and I felt very unsafe. A lot of the times. I had a point where I'm like, I am queer. I'm building up my outside community. It was very scary to think that, leaving the church could mean I would never be with my family for eternity. And even though, I'm starting to realize, like, that it's all bullshit, it's probably all made up, but I've been so indoctrinated, literally, told that my, birth and me being alive literally brought my family closer together and back into the church. So me leaving the church, extremely devastating. And, I had lost my grandma a few years earlier. I think it was like 1 or 2 years before I decided to leave the church. And she actually moved in at the time where I was very ill. My mom was working night shift as a nurse, and my dad worked at the local nut factory in the warehouse. And so I was very ill, and I needed around-the-clock care. And my grandma moved in, so she was my best friend, my confidant. She was someone that would literally be my caretaker, and we developed such a close relationship. And she had passed, and I knew, like, if I were to leave the church, I might risk never seeing my grandma again. And that was, it still gets me.
Yeah. Yeah, knowing how much you love her, that you might not get to see her again.
It was such a hard decision. And I still grapple with, what's going to happen in the end. Where will I go? Obviously, I still believe it's complete bullshit and that's not the end, but I still don't know if I'll be able to see my grandma again. And in that time, it was probably one of the hardest things and kept me anchored in the church, is knowing that, like, I could see my grandma again, and that's my best friend, my second mom.
And that best friend is worth going through all of this lack of safety. That is such a hard thing to grapple with, a place where you don't feel safe to be yourself, but also such deep love for someone. And to have to weigh that, no one should have to ever face that sort of dilemma.
It definitely took me to my knees. Prolonged me leaving the church. And I just kept building up my queer community and support and listening to my mentors. I was like, okay, I think I'm ready. I decided I'm not going to BYU. I want to move to Portland. I'm going to go to Portland State. And I regrouped, and I decided I don't want to live a really sad life. And, not the sad life that my dad told me I was going to live as a lesbian, but I'm like, I don't want to live a sad celibate life, because my dad at one point was like, for you to continue living in this house and being here, you need to tell your bishop. You need to get counsel from your bishop and tell him that, what you told me, that you're gay. And I did go to my bishop, and I was like, hey, it's me. I'm gay. And he's like, all right, have you acted on it? And I'm like, what does even acting on it mean, dude?
Great question. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was like, oh, and I did ask him, and he's like, holding hands, are you following the laws of chastity? Are you, having unclean thoughts? And I'm like, of course I'm having unclean thoughts about women.
Yeah.
Come on,
right.
sir. Come
Yes.
on.
Yes.
Come off it, dude. Didn't mention that. Nope. No unclean thoughts here. No holding hands. No smooching. Nope. And up until this point, I had been completely celibate. I had not had sex. I had not drank. I've never smoked. I had coffee, which already I'm like, well, I'm going to hell for that. So whatevs.
Whatever. Might as well do it all.
Exactly. And I was like, yep, I have not acted on it. He's like, well, as long as you don't act on it. And I'm like, well, what does my life look like in the church if I were to not act on it? And he's like, you would be celibate. You can't have a relationship. You would have to be like a member and not have any relationships. You would just be, a party of one for your whole life. And I was like, wow, when you put it that way, that's inspiring. Can't wait for that.
Yeah.
God,
wow.
horrific. That is like subsisting. That is not a life.
Right.
I was just like flabbergasted. I'm like, are you real? Like, I literally had to do a double take at him. I'm like, this guy is fucking serious.
Yeah.
And I started researching, what are my options in this church? If I stay, if I go, like, if I, act on my unclean thoughts, what are the repercussions of that?
Right.
Where am I going to
know? Exactly. Yeah, what's going to happen?
And I was looking, and there had been priesthood holders who are gay, and they served in positions of power. Of course, it's men. They never talk about lesbian women or non-binary or trans folks. But there was a gentleman that served as second counselor to like the bishop in Utah, out gay, not partnered, completely celibate. Of course, this is of course most likely incorrect. But, portrayed that he was celibate and he was living his best life and he was in a position of power. Look at that. So inclusive. Wow. Go you. Go patriarchy. Yuck. And yeah, that chilled me to the bone. I was like, yeah, fuck that. Nope. And also, I was freaked out. I'm like, I don't know how to have sex. How does one have lesbian sex? How does one have oral and be protected, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'd never had these talks.
Of course not. Not in the Mormon church. Nope.
I never got the lesbian sex talk from my parent. And like the only sex talk that I had, and like thank God I do hold a lot of respect for my mom because, she is very much like, you can date men. I do want you to get married, but like you need to get your bachelor's first. Like that is a requirement, and like really cautioned me against like it was a double-edged sword. She wanted me to date men. She didn't want me to be gay, but she also wanted me to be able to support myself and be an independent woman, right?
Sure, because she was.
Yes. And she did give me the sex talk. It was definitely cis hetero sex talk. But she also emphasized something that I had never heard from my church leaders. Because, like, church leaders, like, in my young women's classes, we would have the sex talk and, like, sex positive, basically. Don't touch yourself, yada, yada, yada. If you do, you're, like, a used Kleenex to your husband. Like, that was, like, the comparison I very much vividly recall. And I was like, great, that's lovely. And my mom was like, my mom taught me that, like, sex was to please your husband. And, like, you should just take it. And my mom literally said, absolutely, you should not. And that was the first time I think I've ever heard that in my life, that sex could be for pleasure. It does not have to be, to procreate. You could say no. And, that was super radical. I mean, my grandma, grew up in the South and, she was definitely abused and didn't know that she had those options. And like for my mom to provide that empowerment that I could say no, that I could have sex for other reasons than being a baby making machine, that was just like radical to me. And like really it still sticks with me. Like I still remember we were in her bathroom, pouring over menstrual products or like, products and her having that conversation with me and giving me that idea that and empowerment that I have a choice, and that it just really is powerful.
That you have the power in sexual relationships. Yeah, that is a novel thing for a lot of religious connotations, and especially if your grandma didn't have that. I mean, that's a big step for your mom, and so I'm so glad that she was able to give you that. That's super big, yes.
It really hit me. I started pursuing leaving the church, so I did a bunch of research. I was very intentional. I'm like, I don't know if I could get a lawyer, and even at the time, wait list for lawyers that knew how to navigate the church system. It was very expensive. I'm a 19-year-old.
You're in college.
Exactly. Where am I going to get this? And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do the thing. I'm going to have sex with a woman. And I got on dating apps. I talked to, my fellow elder queer, and I was like, how do I have sex with a woman? Yes. And I was like,
the secrets.
Yes. And she's like, oh, you should probably use a barrier. And gave me the sex talk. And I was like, so saran wrap, I put that over my bowl. I cover it. She's like, no, there's dental dams.
Saran wrap. I've never heard that, but yeah. Okay.
I have no idea. It is absolute. Yeah, I'm feeling shame coming up. I
no, but you
just
didn't
don't
know any
right?
better. It's
no,
great. I love
didn't.
it.
I know, it's hilarious thinking back of what was I thinking? Might as well have been foil. Just put foil over my bowl and my clit. What the fuck?
The internet wasn't there. What were you gonna do? Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it was just ridiculous. So yeah, I went to, I think it was a student health center, and I ran in so quick. I grabbed a bunch of condoms and I dropped a bunch and I just ran out of there. I was like a flash. I was like,
no one saw me. No one saw that.
Yes, left proof that I was there. But I got my dental dams and I got condoms because I was like, oh, she taught me that I could make a dental dam out of a condom.
Nice.
Wild. Look at that. Versatile.
Didn't know that.
I got on Tinder, I matched with someone, and I was so scared. And I was like, I've never had sex before. I don't know what to do, but I really want to have sex with a woman. And she was great. She was so sweet. I said that. I said the thing.
Yes.
Such a fucking
vulnerable.
dork.
Yeah.
So embarrassing. But I was like, I want to do the thing. And she's like, great. And I'm like, would you like anything? Would you like to make out? Can I give you also oral? And she's like, no, I am so excited that you're choosing me to be your first partner in this adventure. And I was like, great. And I was like, so what's next? And she's like, well, we can set up a time to have sex. I'm like, oh, okay, great.
Yeah. And
I was very intentional of picking the time and the place. So my parents were flying out to go see my sibling because at the time my sibling lived in a different state. And then my uncle who lived with us at the time was also in travel. So both folks were up in the air, no chance of anyone coming home and discovering my rendezvous with this lovely woman.
Yes. Safe.
And I went through with the thing. I was shaking. I think I had 2 panic attacks in the morning of meeting with this human. It was probably one of the best sexual experiences I still to date have had in my life. It was amazing. The kindness, the care, the intentionality that she had, active consent throughout the entire sex experience, which I feel is very different than the typical cis hetero experience that I hear recounted in sessions with clients, with my friends. It was absolutely, it was the best. I felt cared for. I felt seen, listened to. It was just radical. It was amazing. Super awkward. Too. I'm so awkward.
And how beautiful though, right? You've gone through this whole journey of in your teenage years finding out that you felt like you might be gay and having to go through all of this fighting and obstacle and barriers that people try to put up in your way to stop you from this moment. And then to have that moment in it to be so amazing. I'm sure it was such a deep form of validation for all of the fighting that you had to do to be free.
Absolutely.
Oh.
Yeah, I felt very empowered to make the choice, and thinking on the flip side of I don't know if I would have that ability and that voice and hetero experience with a husband. I'm sure if my husband wanted sex, I'd be like, okay, I guess we're having sex.
Yep.
It might not be comfortable for me. It might be very scary. And in this moment, I'm like, I am empowered. I can make the decision. I want to have sex. I'm going to be intentional about it. And it was, like I said, one of the best experiences of my life. Very kind person. And I had sex. I sat with it. It was very affirming. I was like, I'm definitely gay.
Yes.
Definitely gay.
Fuck yes.
I'm like, would I have an orgasm with a man like this? Absolutely not. And then I started to sit with all those feelings coming back of I fucked up. I fucked up.
Shame coming up.
I had sex. It's very unholy sex. And now, I've done the thing. I can't really go back. And that's something that was like, I was very intentional about. I'm like, that is like the last straw. I don't think I could come back from that. And I don't think I want to.
Yeah.
And I was at that point where I'm almost done. I'm with my interpreting program. I have all the credits. I'm ready to transfer to Portland State and leave. I'm leaving my home. I'm leaving the church. I just need to get out, and I don't think I could get out another way. It's too complicated, or you know, I'm gonna keep this guilt keeping me in line and like submissive, basically. And I, you know, had an ally at the Institute. You know, I like to make buddies wherever I go, and so one of the church ladies and I were connected. Over the years, I built a lot of trust, and you know, even though she was like, well, I don't really understand, but I support you and I care about you, and you know, let me know what I can do. And so I confided in her that I was like, I am really struggling. I'm going to talk to the bishop. You know, I sinned, and I don't know if I want to repent and go through that process and stay in the church. And she like had to take, you know, a minute to think about that. And she's like, do you want me to go with you, you know, and sit outside, you know, in support, or, you know, just even having her know that information was really comforting, because I couldn't tell my parents, I couldn't tell my sibling, I couldn't tell any of my family members that I was going through, you know, all these challenges. And so everything was very secretive. Even going to the queer center, I had to wait till my parents were either at work or they were in bed, and then I would sneak out to go to the Q center. I didn't tell my parents for like 3 years after that I was like going to like queer clubs and, you know, attending these like youth groups. I would just say I'm like going to a study session and whatnot, and I, you know, couldn't share about the friends.
Right.
My bishop, and I'm like, all right, well, I acted on it. I'm as gay could be.
Yeah, now what?
Exactly. And that's what I was like, what happens next? He's like, well, I guess it depends on like, do you want to repent? And I was like, I don't think I do. And, you know, he laid it out of like you
yes,
could
don't
exactly get out of there.
Run.
Shaking myself. And he laid it out of like, well, we have to move to like a disciplinary action. I was like, well, what does that mean?
What does that mean? Yeah.
Exactly. I was so afraid. And the only time I think I've heard of disciplinary action and excommunication, one of my deaf friends had shared that his dad was excommunicated. And back in like the, I think 90s or maybe in like 2000s, they would actively announce when a church member was excommunicated from the church in sacrament meeting. It was like the business part of sacrament meeting, of actively shaming people. They're like, this person.
Public humiliation.
Yes. Exactly. Like, don't leave the fold, or you're going to be like a loser like this person. And you're like, oh, great. That's awesome.
Wow.
Personal business aired. And excommunication is wild because it is on par with murder, child abuse, adultery, and what other deviant, you know, sex, and like deviant sex in the sense of like anal or like any exactly. Like, how is that grouped in?
How's that on the same level?
Precisely. Like, how is that grouped in with murder and sexual abuse of children? Like, what the actual fuck?
Problematic. Yes, super problematic.
Also, I probably should have asked you if I could use
cuss
that
all
word.
the time. Fuck. You can use fuck all you want here. It's safe.
Maybe I should have asked at the beginning.
No, there's no rules. There's no rules.
Okay. So he's laying it out. He's like, you could go through the repentance process. You and I would have continuous meetings over months together of recounting your sin and how sad you feel. Isn't that disgusting?
But you don't feel sad. That's the whole thing, right? Like, how
gay joy. That orgasm, though. Second thing
yes.
was you could go through repentance. Also, you couldn't pray. You couldn't give any kind of testimonies. You couldn't participate at all. You were a body in the room, and everyone could see that you were there, but not actively participating. So also being outed and like publicly shamed, right? Again,
yes, someone would know something's wrong with you.
The third option was like disfellowship, which meant you were kept on the books. You know, the books, your name is counted as a member. You can't go into the temple. You don't have a temple recommended, and basically you're counted as a number, but like all of your blessings were like revoked, as if you were like not even present. Like all the things you contributed to the church, your tithing, the countless hours of service that as youth, adults, we were supposed to do, and completely erased. Like you don't matter. All that matters is that they get to count you as a number, and all your good work and all of your community and the ways that you've showed up just out the window. And that was like absolutely like such a mind-boggling like slap in the face. So like all the service and care and kindness and ways that I've, you know, been in community with these folks, like, doesn't matter. Does not matter. All that matters is my money, and I would still have to pay tithing if I were disfellowshipped. But
of course you do. Of course, right? Like, wow.
It's a business.
You need that. So would you still go to heaven at that point for eternity, or?
No, I think,
so yeah, this
like,
is really big.
Exactly. I think it's like absolved. And then excommunication means like you're unbaptized. Like all those, like same as the disfellowship, it's like you weren't even a member. So you walk in the room and like you would have to take all of the lessons from the missionaries over again. You have to go through missionary lessons, coaching with the bishop. You would even have to go through still like the disciplinary action of like, were you really sorry for your sin? Like, are you going to do better this time? And then you would have to get rebaptized as an adult and go through everything like all over again. I was like, oh my God. And I was like, well, let me think this one over.
Yeah.
I was absolutely frightened. I'm like, I can't be here. I don't know what to do. And like, I consulted, you know, my friend from the Institute of Religion, and she's like, well, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I have no clue. And, you know, also the church will send you disciplinary action of like, here's a formal letter that you're going through disciplinary action. And these are the people that are going to be in the meeting. Of course, it was like the bishop, first, second, third counselor, and the male secretary. So I had 4 men that were in my disciplinary action, and I was alone. Men. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And they're like 50 plus.
Wow.
And I had to get the letter sent to my institute friend because I couldn't let my parents know that I was going through disciplinary action. So I had to ask my bishop to send the mail to this person's home so that I could have this facade of me still going to church until I left for college, like my 4-year.
My God, how are you feeling at all this time? I can't even imagine.
I was constantly breaking down. I was having to like leave class, go to the bathroom and cry. It was just like in my body. I was so shaky and jumpy and just like all these trauma responses. Yeah, my grades were really suffering. It was very upsetting. And I know there was like one Mormon girl in my class, and we were talking about like religion, and she just was like holding in such high esteem, and she was also going to a singles ward, and you know, just on this different track. And I'm like, you just do not get it.
Nope.
Do not get it.
Nope.
Not the life. So I started going through the disciplinary action, and my friend would, you know, wait out in just, you know, sit and wait for me, and it was just as bad as I thought it would be. There's like 3 men on the side of my bishop's desk. I'm sitting in a chair, and then there's a man taking notes, and the door is closed, and they ask me to recount my sin. They want to hear the details of the sex I had.
Yeah, how specific were they at? Like, because this seems, predatory and uncomfortable for me hearing this.
Yeah, similar to the temple interviews. They were asking about, okay, what sex did you have, right? Because I think they also want to know, like, well, was it, you know, the unholy way of having sex? Was it anal? You know, what were implements being used? Like, the ways in which they were asking these invasive questions, I was also, like, in a fawn state. I was just,
of course, yep.
So freaked out. I was shaking. I've never had sex before. And then now I'm going through this process and just deep shame, anxiety, and also trying to hold my ground and advocate for myself. So it's just like grappling with all these emotions and like these learned responses of like, you don't talk back to your bishop. You answer questions as truthfully as you can. It was just so wild to have all of this, you know, perceived, you know, power in the room, the patriarchy like staring me down, and me being an active participant. I need to leave the church. I'm grappling with, I don't want to lose my connection to my family for eternity. I'm told, you know, I'm going to live a really sad life, choosing life to be a lesbian, and also leaving the church, which has all these perks and community built in, and that all these terrible things would happen. upon leaving the church. So all this fear mongering going through my head.
Really striking you with that fear.
Exactly. So fucked up. And I was like, I'm not sorry for having sex. I had sex with a woman. I'm not going to go into the details, and I was very clear about that.
Good.
I'm like, I'm not going to share that with you. I don't know where that leads us. And they're like, well, we want to, be sure that you're, not going to go and tell people, talk badly about the church, that you're going to hold the church in, high esteem. And like, we just want to reiterate like all the ways that you'd be losing all these privileges, and like highlighting, all the covenants that I made to God and to the church, and my standing in the community, and that I would basically be like left with nothing, and that like, do you really want that life of like the protections? Because like when you actively tithe, when you go to the temple, I hadn't gotten the blessing or gone on mission where I would get the garments, right? Like the special underwear, which is basically fireproof. So like if the second coming happens and you're good standing with the Lord, you're paying your tithe and you're wearing your garments, you will literally be protected and you won't go up in flames. Or like if you were to get in a car accident and you're wearing your garments, you won't be harmed. And, like they were saying, like you're losing all of those like safety precautions. And like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, is this a life jacket? Like what?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's so wild the way that they were, just using fear.
I mean, I don't want to label this, but like as I'm hearing this, it's just screaming emotional abuse.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Right? Fear.
On point.
If you don't do this, like you're going to have nothing. Because I think if anyone else heard this without that context of the religious frame, you're going to have nothing. You might die and have no life afterwards, and you're going to be completely alone. Like if any sort of partner or someone was saying that to you, we would call that emotional abuse.
True. That is very true. Very astute observation. When you say it like that.
Yeah,
dang.
it's like,
Bullshit.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I know, like, the context of that is very heavy, but I think it's something to discuss.
Absolutely. I went through that for 4 months.
Oh my God, my heart.
It was gnarly. It was so gnarly. And I mean, it would be basically, I think they were hoping that I changed my mind, and they were trying to wear me down, right?
Yes.
So they kept asking the same question. Yep, emotional abuse.
Yep.
They were wearing me down, hoping my, no would turn into a yes, or maybe, or, sow some kind of doubt, in my confidence. And I just kept saying the same things. I'm not going to talk about the sex act that I had with this person. I don't want to repent. I also don't want to be in this church, but I don't see another way out. And I was pretty adamant of like, they kept bringing up all these hypotheticals. Like if a gay person were to come to you and ask you about your, experience in the church, like what will you say? If you were to leave the church, how are you going to paint the church?
I'd love to hold the space for you to paint the church right now. This is just, yes.
I said, I'd be honest, you can't be your authentic self, right? You could potentially go through a disciplinary action. You might, have some fear instilled in you, and of course they're shifting in their seats. I'm shifting my seats because I'm getting really hot and angry with this line of questioning and just realizing how much their image matters, as opposed to here's this queer person that's suffering by being manipulated into staying into this oppressive community environment and trajectory in my life. And here they are not giving a shit about the discomfort that, they literally showed up and showed out, right? 4 people, all white men, and here's this, visibly queer trans person trying to intimidate. And I was very honest. I would give them resources so they can make an informed decision on why they should leave the fucking church.
Yep.
I would definitely caution them against staying and like the repercussions and that huge trade-off of like, do you want to live an authentic life, or do you want to live a life where you're oppressed and told that you're never going to be good enough, and you can wait till the afterlife and like who knows what's going to happen then, but like, hey, if you're celibate and you're a good person, like you never know, God might throw you a bone and maybe you'll still have a straight partner, but they'll be accepting that you're gay. Like what?
Yeah,
that's something to look forward to. An eternity of like that. Yuck.
No.
It was just, it was a very frightening experience. Finally, the last meeting, I think it was like the 4th or 5th month of going through that, they sat down with me and they're like, well, after, hearing your sin, going through, our options, talking with higher ups, the decision is excommunication. And so I was excommunicated from the Mormon church. It was very grounding in that moment. I was both, happy to be done with the church, but also I felt this immense grief and sadness and shame and anxiety of like, I don't know if I could ever tell my parents this. How will I keep this facade going until I'm able to leave my home and go to college? What would my grandma say? I still had a grandma that was living and, very much a part of the church and had established the church in my hometown, and just really worried about, fucking things up.
Yeah.
And I had a really, really hard time. It was one of the roughest transitions I think I've had ever, of going from like being a part of the community to like still maintaining contact with the deaf community and being able to connect outside of church. But it was overnight. I did not have a community, the community that I've had and could count on since I was a baby, right? Like church members would show up on my almost deathbed as a baby, right? They would bring, food to my parents, childcare. You could always count on community. And then that was gone with this decision. And I know I had played a part of it of like, I know I want out. Of course, I don't want to be completely excommunicated from the community, but I know I don't want to be a part of the church. And it was very hard to like grapple with. And I didn't have anyone reach out to me other than like the institute person and like the deaf community. And no one else, I kid you not, like no one contacted me.
So you were alone in all of that distress.
Yep, I was very much alone in that grief. And I think one of the scariest things, and I started to think that I made one of the biggest mistakes of my life. It was not even 5 days later that my dad was hit while biking and sustained a traumatic brain injury. And I thought that was God smiting me for how close of a correlation is that? I get excommunicated 5 days later. My dad is incapacitated with a traumatic brain injury, broken neck.
Whoa. I think that makes a fuck ton of sense, right? Because you were the baby that was born to save them. Now you're leaving. Now here's the consequence for your sin. I think that makes a lot of sense given the dynamic and the paradigm that you were in. Yeah.
It was
100%.
Awful.
Which is horrible.
I was like, this was me. Good
Yep.
job, Clark. Way to fuck it up. I was torn. I was wrecked. I was fucking wrecked. Oh my God. I couldn't tell my mom because no one knew that I got excommunicated. And I had to sit with that like, sorry, Dad. Sorry I got you ran over by a fucking Toyota truck. Great. Ugh.
And you were alone. I just can't even imagine. I mean, I'm sure as a fellow clinician, like, community is one of the biggest things to help us, I don't even know, survive these sorts of things. So I just can't even imagine having to deal with this all on your own. It was
horrible. Yeah, I was definitely messed up. I was super messed up for a long time. Thankfully, my dad is, stable now. He medically retired after his accident, like a year or two. I think it was a year after his he had to medically retire. But yeah, that was like really hard to grapple with. And I ended up telling my parents a few years ago, I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago, that I was excommunicated, and that was, not easy for them to hear.
2 or 3 years ago. So in between that time, they thought maybe you just left the church?
That I went inactive. I told them, I'm like, I stopped going to church because my dad was like, you could transfer to the Institute in Portland, and like showed me where the church building was and had me meet the missionaries. And at this time, I'd already been out of the church, right? Excommunicated. Right. And so, just not saying I was inactive and I didn't want to go, and like still getting that pressure.
Wow.
And, yeah, it was really, really hard.
Oh.
But yeah, that was me leaving the church, and I can definitely see my life is like so much better. Even though I'm living with that pain, like it definitely helps me understand my clients that have gone through religious trauma, just how horrible it can be to like suffer in silence and to be coerced into these religions and to stay, and all the fear mongering and just feeling so alone and confused and having literal eternal impacts from your said decisions. Like that just weighs and it breeds shame. I hear how it impacts people's sex life, the way that they can receive touch, ask for touch, it comes into consent. I just see it permeates all parts of folks' lives, the shame that is embedded in us from these religions and the patriarchy.
Yes, 100%. And not just any decision, but a decision that was your authentic desire for another human being, something that is a part of your body, part of your natural desire, is being told to you that you're excommunicated from the whole church because of this, losing all of your salvation from just this one expression, right? That is so natural to you. And then how does that, as a figure, as a fellow allosexual, right? That is a huge part of our connection and relationships in our human experience. And so how does that shape you, having such a negative, shameful experience for something that felt natural to you and it is a part of the human experience? How do you come out of that and be okay?
Exactly. And that it was held on par with murder and sexual abuse.
And that's
what is that?
Yeah, and that's your natural desire and attraction in this world. How do you grapple with that when you get out?
So much shame. I'm actively working on it, every day.
Yes.
And I know that it impacts my relationships, the way that I show up with partners, the ways that I can advocate or not advocate for myself during sexual experiences.
Mm-hmm.
I see it with clients, and I'm starting to do somatic body work with a therapist, and I'm in therapy. It's been really hard. I think a lot of my work and learning has also come from obviously going through educational programs, like my master's program, being introduced to kink community, polyamory. That has been life-changing. I identify as polyamorous and kinky. It's just been freeing, and to feel accepted and loved and just having that new community. And I think that's been the biggest thing that I feel is missing from my life after, coming to an end with the Mormon church, and that part of my life is getting into a new community and folks that aren't just going to abandon me because I'm gay and shame me for my want to be in my body, to love my body, to show my body off. I feel confident, and I've had top surgery, and I feel good about myself, and folks are not going to actively shame my body or the kinks that I'm into, or because I have multiple partners, which also I shared with my parents, and I thought they'd be cool with it, right? I was like, I'm polyamorous because my family, it's really sad, but polygamy, one of my ancestors had 9 wives. And I was like, my parents are totally going to be chill. And they were not. And I was like, okay. So Mormons are all about polygamy. My ancestors, and now you're shaming me for
now you're just hypocritical.
Exactly. What the hell? I was like,
does anyone see this? Does anyone see this?
It's a no. Okay. But yeah, I think also finding resources like Wild and Sublime has been life-changing. Karen Yates, shout out.
Yes, she was on the podcast.
Love Karen.
Yeah.
It's been radical to learn about healers in the community doing the work, sexological body work, coaching. I think that is radical, and that is Lord's work. I don't see the Mormon church as doing the actual Lord's work. They can go fuck themselves. But I see people like Karen Yates, Cassie Porter, sexological body workers, sex workers are doing the Lord's work, getting us comfortable with being in our bodies, asking for touch. Also, one-way touch has been something that has been completely healing, asking a partner, for touch, and also not having that expectation of it given back, right?
Yep.
I think being able to feel empowered and okay with not having to give and just being able to receive has just absolutely changed the way that I move in the world.
Yes, that right to pleasure, right? Yeah, that is a divine right. You have a divine right to pleasure. Yeah, I feel like you hit on one of those really big things where, at least from my research when I was looking into spiritual trauma, one of the biggest things that was a factor for healing afterwards was finding a community. And so then when you have these intersecting identities here, to find a community that can accept you for all of that and provide understanding and safety and love, that is healing.
Yes.
That is healing, right? I mean, these horrible things happen to us, and it's impossible to ignore the fact that we're changed from them. But I think the biggest thing is that we're not defined by them nor stuck in that place.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's really brought me to like, okay, what is important to me, my values. It's same with, the pandemic, where everyone is kind of like getting jolted awake of like, what is actually important to me? Where is my energy going out? How am I receiving energy?
Yes.
Trying new things, feeling empowered to make decisions. And I feel like that's what really got me out of my rut of like, I know that I want community, I want chosen family over bio family. I want to be able to wear what I want. I want to make informed decisions about my body, my care, how I show up. And I feel like getting into the kink and polyamorous community has just been absolutely life-changing, to feel empowered, to see other people empowered and owning their confidence, to be able to wear and express kinks and not having those shame. I just feel like shame is so ingrained in me in the way that I move about the world, and having the opportunity to unlearn that in a safer environment, not always safe, but safer, like going to clubs and dungeons and being in community with other queer people and being part of polycules. It's just been absolutely like that community care has been really,
it's different,
really rad. Yeah, it's very different.
It's different. And you notice, I mean, like personally, as someone who's in those spaces as well, I noticed that difference in the level of acceptance and love and ability to hold space for the diversity of the human experience and so many different factors. And so it is so healing. And I mean, let's call that church, right? Like exactly. Kink and all these things, like it is healing. That is our church. Exactly. And thank God for that, right?
Oh my gosh. I literally whisper that. I'm like, this is where I feel God. If God were a person or the goddess, this is absolutely where I feel closest to God.
100%. I am with you in that, right? I am so with you. And I appreciate you sharing your story so much. So there's so much, this journey of coming into your yes, right? You started with that, and now you've hit this place where you feel that and you feel celebrated in that and safe to express that and found your chosen family. And I'm so happy for that.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. I know. There is one question I do ask everyone on the podcast as a closing question.
Oh.
Ooh, yeah. The one question is, what is one thing that you wish other people knew was more normal?
Knowing that it's okay that if you don't know what you want, and giving yourself the opportunity to explore, to get curious, to be a lifelong learner, and not having to know all the things. It is okay to be a newbie, a novice, to step out, to ask mentors, to ask trusted people, and be okay with being vulnerable. I think we're so afraid of making mistakes in any part of our lives, and it's just like, give yourself that permission. I'm going to take this opportunity. I'm going to be brave. I might not like it, and that's okay. I'm going to try.
Dare I say that's living? Right? Living is, right? Like, living is when we are beginners to new things. When you're doing the same thing over and over again, that's just a repetition, a routine. I feel like living comes in being brave, trying new things, trying an art that I'm horrible at. That's the process of being a beginner and continuing to live, is to go through that change.
Absolutely. Only constant in life is change, right?
Yep, there's my Buddhism. Yep, there it is. Yeah, 100%. Because if you're stagnant, stagnant water, death, so many things. Nothing, life is not stagnant. And so I love that you say that. And I think it's so important when we talk about change to also talk about the piece of feeling uncomfortable in it. It's never, at least in my opinion, I don't know about anyone else, but it always feels like I'm stepping over one of those like platforms that may or may not have a hole that's going to just fall completely under you. You're like, I'm going to try this. Oh, that didn't feel good. I fell straight down. We're going to get up and stand somewhere else, right? It's a little bit of that unknown, but at the same time, there's no other way to live fully, in my opinion.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's brave. It's brave and courageous to make a change and to step out of the norm. And it's super scary because, like you said, there might be a pitfall. You might fall, but also you can get back up.
Yep.
Try something new.
Yeah, and that's why I want to just shout out and take a moment to pause the bravery of your actions to leave the church at a time when you were alone. It's extremely brave.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. You're a light to a lot of people, I promise.
You're cool. Very kind.
Yeah.
Very happy to be out of the church. Happy to be in community with other folks that understand. see my vulnerability, and I feel very held and cared for.
Good, as you deserve to be.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, that's all I got. Yeah.
Thank you for having me. I so appreciate it.
Yeah, it was so lovely to get to hear your story. Thank you. If you enjoyed today's episode, then leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you're a part of the anarchist community, then follow us on Instagram or nominate a guest for the show by sending in a letter to modernanarchypodcast@gmail.com. Otherwise, I'll see you next week.